Alrighty now. More Lost. Oh, yes. It's Lost is over. Okay, I'm sort of in the camp that I think it could have been done, more to my satisfaction. But that's just the way it is. Here, Lost did not have to tie these loose ends together. They did in the off season this thing that was like an old In Search of from the 70s, News of the weird. Does Bigfoot really exist? These guys say they saw him. Okay, but it was about the Dharma Initiative. And this is what Lost turns out to be. They threw in all these elements. They didn't invent these things. The numbers, there are radio broadcasts people have gotten for years of just numbers from like shortwave bouncing around the world, and you just hear these series of numbers. And I've heard them and read about this is a real phenomenon. A lot of people think this is delivering covert messages. It's just a stream of numbers, and sometimes the message, and it's a way for spies to get their messages. Just all they need is a little shortwave radio. Because they're real. Or who knows what it is. Maybe it's just a weather station that reads off numbers for some, who knows. But they just pulled that in. And everything else, when they had John Locke choose between the gifts, that's like the choosing the new, monk kind of Dalai Lama kind of thing. I forget which one does it. But, the reincarnation of Buddha would choose this particular thing. And these kinds of... every element's like that. Now, not every, a lot of the elements, the main elements are like that. Now, what got us, those of us that like taking that weird stuff and giving it a little explanation, especially if it can be tied together to make sense, is that you break that enigma. We like that. See, these numbers were being broadcast from an island. There was a guy typing the numbers in, and it had something to do. There were reasons for it. So we started getting promise. And then things like the polar bear, which I didn't start watching till the fourth season. And one reason was like, polar bear on the island. Thought, great, they're going to David Lynch us, but I don't really want to watch. There's polar bears on an island. We never know why. Now there's a dinosaur. Who knows? But then when I did watch, I found out, oh no, they just explain it. It's of course, yeah, it's weird. Polar bear on a tropical island. How's that happen? A person brought him there. Okay. And they did that a lot. It's like, it's just this. Well, how did that happen? There was somebody there and moved it. So... it all started to make sense, and then they decided to stick with the enigmatic part. And that makes sense. A show like this that brings in news of the weird, X-Files, it's about the unexplained. It can be. Now, some of us thought Lost was going to be about explaining things, and I wouldn't like that. And so now what I would have liked the last season 6, I was thinking about it. Let's say I go with them. It's their show, of course, and let's say it's going to be about people moving on. And it's going to be about the character development, and to the point where we get to the point where all the characters, no matter how they died, what they did, they are ready to move on. I would have not had that flash sideways, be in L.A. It would have been on the island. These people would have woke up on the island, maybe before we knew they were dead. Maybe we'd see them later, how they died. And they'd think they were on the island. How did I get back to the island, depending on their case. They'd see other people, but those people wouldn't see them usually. And it would turn out that those people, that they were the whisperers, that these people didn't know they were dead, our characters. And eventually, mid-season, John Locke and Boone, wake up. Their eyes open, and they're like on the island. And this is like a holding ground for the dead. Not back in the mainland, but the island is. And then the whole mystery, the whole story of characters and the weird science would have been emphasized. And the reason I like this is because I think this is implicit in the story. It's one interpretation that can be deconstructed out. But if you'd done the last season this way, then it would, be more solid. But anyway, then you'd have an arc where the weird part was that living people landed on an island that's a holding ground for the dead. Right? So that's where the wandering dead would go. And that's why you could see the dead. And then in season 6, we would see dead like John Locke and Boone appearing and helping the living to accomplish what they needed to accomplish. And the story would have been just the same then, but we would have been able to see the whisperers. And to just see the whisperers would have been good, to invoke those past things. And with the whisperers as a device, you could easily explain things like the numbers of, this or that or the other. Now, a lot of Lost fans that pay too much attention, I never played this, but there was an augmented reality game. They kind of explained the series of numbers represented this equation that would say whether the world was going to end in apocalypse or not. They were trying to change the numbers. But that was just Dharma. So from the producer's point of view, that was just, Dharma didn't know all the answers, so they were just trying. But anyway, but in the end, I'm not saying they should have done anything different. They decided they could have answered these things if they wanted to. They could have just made up answers. Instead, they just answered a few of them, and in the end, they wanted it to be enigmatic, and they wanted it to be about the moving on. So I think I could fit in with that idea, and that season 6 would have been good, showing the Whisperers, all our characters that they showed us in the Sideways timeline, which seemed unimportant, would be there in the same world, but Whisperers, dead, trying to help these people solve the whole problem so that the conclusion comes out without the man in black succeeding, and they all would have been in one world, and as they died, they would have come into this other space, and it would have been very warming, and we would have gotten that feeling, because I do agree with the person I decided to reply to that one element is it's kind of cool that they tried to put all of the characters in a place where they could come clean and get over their problems, because they showed us all these flawed characters, and some of them you think they're going to be redeemed, or John Locke really is going to turn out to be special, and they die without doing that. So they wanted to give us a place where the people could because the story was supposed to be about resolving your hang-ups, but they also show that some people just in a cycle and don't get there, and you can die before you're done. So they sort of wanted to give us access to that. I just think it would have been cooler if the place that those people, the dead, came back to were the Whisperers, and they could have easily made it that the Whisperers thought they were alive, because if the other people they saw didn't see them, and when they touched them, they couldn't touch them. And meanwhile, they had to survive on the island just like always. They could live on the island. They had to live on the island. And by the last third of the season, you could be reenacting some of the scenes we saw when people heard the Whispers. Only now we'd see the people going, "Hey, can you see us? Should we tell Ricardo?" Now the Whispers are always also backwards, and I love the weird stuff. So it'd be great if the dead lived backwards in time, and that's why their voices are backwards. But that might be kind of weird, walking. I think most people couldn't stand watching the scene backwards and stuff. But anyway, yeah. This is like a post-mortem. It's an interesting... I don't want to badmouth it. I think the way it ended, it made it... I mean, right up to the last few episodes, or last season, it could have been really great in my view. Now it's a good piece of entertainment. I'm probably not going to rewatch it, but I'll probably spend a couple more months thinking about this world of the island. But it's not even at this point really thinking about Lost. It's just these are all elements, in Fortean, weird science kind of areas. And they played with them. And they actually pieced them together pretty well, considering how most shows and works of fiction that dwell on those things, they go much more for the weird. They made it all pretty straightforward compared to that. But in the end, they went off onto just, details don't. And by end, really the second half. It was kind of funny. I started watching the 4th season, and by then that's when they were like, we're not giving any more answers. But I got into it because I'm like, hey, they present all this stuff, and then they give straightforward answers. Oh, somebody was listening. Oh, that guy really was that. So, and then the answers just diverged. But, it's still a good TV show. I mean, one of the really great TV shows. But some TV shows are like timeless works of art. And I kind of think it missed that for me. But then again, a lot of people really love soft science fiction. If you love soft science fiction and all you want is the science fiction settings, and here's a weird thing, and here's a weird thing, and you don't want them explained, and if they're explained, you're not going to follow anyway, then Lost probably is still a great show for them. But I love explanations.